Hi, in this video we will be learning the concept of missing data mechanism. In the last video we talked about missing data patterns, which basically tell us the location of the missing values in our dataset but doesn't tell us anything about the reasons for why data are missing. In order to handle missing data appropriately, we must consider the reasons for why the data are missing. And this leads us to the concept of missing data mechanism, which provides us insight about the underlying reasons for missingness. And we can think about the missing data mechanism as a statistical model for the probability or chance that a given variable is observed or missing. We will be considering three missing data mechanisms as proposed by Rubin in 1976, and from the simplest to the hardest, they are missing completely at random, missing at random, and missing not at random. The concept of missing data mechanism is important because it determines whether a given statistical approach is appropriate or not for our data analysis. To facilitate the exposition and make ideas concrete, I will be following the example from Fitzmaurice, published in 2008 in the journal Nutrition. The paper is available on Learn. So our context is the following. Suppose that we are interested in the relationship between the variable y1 and the variable y2. And to be concrete, suppose that y1 are the blood glucose levels and y2 is the body mass index, the BMI. And further suppose that while for all individuals in our dataset we have a record of their blood glucose levels, for some of them we do not have a record of their BMI. This is an example of a univariate pattern. We have two variables, only one of the variables as missing values, the BMI variable, and in this context we can think about the missing data mechanism as a probability model, as a model for the probability that the BMI is missing. And let us start with the simplest missing data mechanism, missing completely at random. We say that data are missing completely at random if the probability that a value is missing is completely unrelated to the values of the other fully observed variables in our dataset, and it's further unrelated to the missing values themselves. So what does this mean in the context of our running example? It means that the probability that a BMI value is missing is the same for all individuals in our dataset. So those individuals with missing BMI values, they are no more likely to be obese or underweight or to have very high or very low glucose levels than those with observed BMI values. In a way, we can think of missing completely at random as being the result of a pure chance mechanism. For instance, if we throw a dice and if we get 1, 2, or 3, the BMI value of the individual will be recorded, and if we get 4, 5, or 6, the BMI of the individual will be missing. The main feature of data missing completely at random is that the observed data can be regarded as a random sample of the complete data. And here, by complete data, we mean the hypothetical data set that would have been obtained in case there were no missing values. And these results, or this implies that the data that we actually observe and the complete hypothetical data set have similar distributions, and further that the observed and missing values have also similar distributions. So in the case of our BMI example, the distribution of the missing BMI values and the observed BMI values are similar. And an important consequence of missing completely at random assumption is that any statistical method that is valid in the absence of missing values will also be valid when data are missing completely at random, and the analysis is restricted to those individuals with complete data. So when we disregard the individuals that have missing values and only retain those with complete that have complete information on all variables, the results are still valid in the sense that they are unbiased, but certainly they are not efficient because we are working with a smaller sample size. So main message under missing completely at random complete case analysis, so an analysis that disregards subjects with missing values, provides unbiased results, but they are inefficient because our sample size is smaller. And as we can probably guess, missing completely at random is a very strong assumption. We basically say that the probability of a missing value occurring is completely unrelated to what we observed or what happens to be missing. And we should only make such an assumption where we have strong reasons to do so. And actually, violations from the missing completely at random assumption can, in a certain way, be verified from our observed data. I will explain why using our running example. Suppose that we have y2, which is the BMI, and we have y1, which is the glucose level. And we know that some values are missing for the BMI and some others are observed. And if we stratify y1, in this case the glucose level variable, on the basis of the missingness on y2, so I will form two groups, one group corresponding to those individuals corresponding to the glucose levels of those individuals with missing BMI values, and another group formed by the glucose levels of those individuals with observed BMI. So basically, I form two groups of glucose levels, and under a missing completely at random assumptions, the distributions of the glucose levels in these two groups should be similar. So when I look at the distribution of the glucose levels for those individuals who have their BMI measured and the distribution of the glucose levels for those individuals whose BMI is missing, those two distributions should be similar, because if they are not similar, this is telling me that the probability of a BMI being missing is somehow related to the glucose levels, and so we can no longer say that it's the same for all individuals, and that is completely unrelated to what we observe. So this is a way, and if we have more variables, we should stratify the other variables on the basis of the missingness on y2 as well. So if I have here a third variable, I will form the groups and I will look at the distribution of the values, the distributions of the values in the two groups. And this is a way for looking for violations of the missing completely at random assumption. However, we must be aware that this procedure cannot take into account whether the missingness on BMI is related to the BMI values that are missing. So we have no way to test that. So basically we can only partially verify whether missing completely at random is reasonable or not. So, as we have seen, missing completely at random is a very strong assumption, and in fact, there are no reasons to believe that most values will occur in a completely at random fashion, and a less restrictive assumption than missing completely at random is missing at random. And missing at random implies that the probability that a value for a variable is missing depends only on the fully observed variables in our data set, but it's further unrelated to the missing values themselves. So this, in our BMI glucose examples, means that, for instance, those subjects who have very high blood glucose levels may be more propense to have their BMI missing. So the probability that a BMI value is missing is related to the glucose levels. And although the probability of missing data on BMI depends on the glucose levels, if we form groups defined by the glucose levels. For instance, if we form a group of individuals whose glucose level is between 80 and 90, I think this is reasonable. Another group of individuals whose glucose levels is between 90 and 100, and so on and so forth. Within these groups formed by individuals whose glucose levels fall in the same range, the probability that an individual will have a missing BMI value is the same as for any other individual in that group. So within these groups formed by individuals with similar blood glucose levels, the missing data on BMI is missing completely at random, but only after we condition on the glucose levels. So within strata defined by similar glucose levels, missing for BMI is completely at random. But this is only, and I reiterate, after conditioning by the glucose levels. So we can think of missing completely at random as being a particular case of missing at random with just one group, right? And we should note that the missing at random assumption is an unverifiable assumption from our data. And why? Because we would need the distribution of the missing values in order to validate the missing at random assumption. And to make this concrete, for the example, what I have just said is that within groups formed by individuals with similar blood glucose levels, the probability that an individual will have a missing BMI value is the same as for any other individual in that group. And so this would imply that within each group, the data are missing completely at random, and then that the distributions of the missing and observed BMI values would be similar. But since we do not have the distributions of the missing BMI values, we cannot check whether this is true or not. And that is why we cannot verify missing at random assumption from the data at hand. And it's an assumption that needs to be justified based on background knowledge and based also on discussions with those leading and planning the studies, because they might have an intuition for whether after conditioning on certain variables, missing will be at random or not. So we need to be in touch with those who have knowledge, practical knowledge about the data set that we are analyzing. And finally, we say that data are missing not at random when the probability that a variable has missing value is related to the missing values themselves. It might be further related to the values of the other fully observed variables, but the main feature of missing not at random is that the probability that a variable has a missing value is related to the missing values themselves. And in the context of our example, this means that, for instance, those subjects who are obese, they might be more propense to have their BMI value missing. So the missing in BMI in this case would be related to the unobserved obesity, because we do not have the corresponding BMI value to know whether or not the person is obese or not. And we should also note that missing not at random can also occur indirectly through the relationship of the variable that has missing values with another variable that was not measured at all in our data set. And an example of this is, suppose that in a medical study we are looking for an outcome of interest, and we are in a longitudinal study, so the subjects, the individual should be coming to the hospital on a regular basis to measure the outcome of interest. And in cases that a particular treatment or drug causes discomfort, the patient is more likely to drop out from the study, and so we will have missing values for the outcome of interest. But if we have no way to know whether the subject was feeling some discomfort or not, the missing will be not at random. If we do not measure discomfort, then the missing, the fact that the individual has dropped out from the study, is not at random. If we measure discomfort, then is missing at random, because it depends on a variable that we have observed and we have information. But in the absence of information about discomfort, the missing would be not at random. And so basically the missing not at random can be also, data can be missing not at random, because the probability that a missing value depends on the missing value themselves, or because the variable with missing values has a relationship with a variable that was not measured at all in our data set. And to finish this part, I will quote Fitzmaurice, where he says that it should be emphasized that assumptions about missing data are inherently difficult, if not possible, to verify from the data at hand. And so whenever possible, researchers should go to great lengths to minimize the amount of missing data in their studies. And we have talked already about this, that when we are in the control, or when we have a word to say about the design of the study, we should try to do our best to minimize the occurrence of missing data. And now, just to conclude, let's do an exercise. This is from a book, and it says the following: a survey is being conducted based on a random sample of companies from the population list, which has the name and size of the company. And our key survey variable of interest is whether or not the company offers health insurance to its employees and the number of health plans offered. And now we are given two situations and asked whether missing is completely at random, missing at random, or missing not at random. And remember that our key variable of interest is whether or not the company offers health insurance to its employees and the number of health plans offered. So in the situation A, we are told that all firms exceeding some certain firm size refuse to participate. But we know that the firm size is a measured variable. So the missingness on the number of plans offered depends on the firm size, and the firm size is observed. So this is missing at random. On B, it says that firms that do not offer health plans and or very limited number of plans are more likely to be non-respondent. So the fact that we have a missing value in the variable that records whether or not the firms offer health insurance to its employees, it's related to this variable itself, right? Because if they do not offer any, or if they offer very limited number of plans, they are more likely to be non-respondent. So the missing value in these variables depends on the missing variable, on the missing value themselves. So this is the definition of missing not at random. And before I stop the video, I've also uploaded, apart from the paper from Fitzmaurice, I've also uploaded to Learn another paper that it's an hypothetical conversation between a doctor and a statistician about the assumptions of missing at random and missing completely at random for a particular problem. I think it's an interesting reading, and so I recommend that you look at that article as well. Thank you.